Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluent Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sports business landscape. Today, we have a really exciting conversation with someone who has been in the space for a long time, focusing on an issue that we all need to be paying attention to around Title IX. It's not my story to tell, though. So, Christine Brown, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Scott, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great and really happy to be here today.
We're happy to have you. And, like I said at the top of the show, Christine, this is a conversation that I believe needs to be at the forefront as we continue to evolve on both youth sports, collegiate sports, professional sports. How do we continue to keep the playing field fair, equal, and really provide opportunities across the landscape? So, look, we like to kick things off and understand the origin story of, what was your journey up to building, your law practice, and then, we'll use it as a springboard to, start to tackle some of the opportunities and issues that face us in the market today. So give us a little insight to your journey, Christine.
Sure. Thank you. So I've been in the space for just over 30 years now. Although I joke that I don't have any athletic talent of my own, I have been surrounded and just embedded in the sports world my entire life. My father, who's also a lawyer, was actually a Division I football referee his whole life. And so I spent my childhood going up and down the East Coast, going to football games and understanding, learning the rules of the football world, but also understanding all the different aspects that go into an athlete being successful. And I knew early on that I wanted to be a lawyer. And so the issues of fairness and equity and really education surrounding a lot of the important issues that are now just on the forefront, I knew that it was a space that I wanted to be in. An additional aspect of my life was that when I was 10 years old, my youngest brother was born, and he was born with Down syndrome. And when he was born, there weren't a lot of opportunities for people with disabilities. And so my family was very involved in forming Special Olympics and creating and advocating for and being involved in opportunities for people with disabilities to be able to participate and feel good about themselves and have those extra activities that we should all have the ability to access.
And, whenever we can tie purpose with our professional mission, it really lays a foundation to go ahead and bring real human elements to, this ecosystem of sport. And we share such similar beliefs that sport is this universal language. And the more people that we have playing, the better society will be. And so instead of taking athletes away from the game, how do we get more athletes into the game? Which, look at Christine, it's sort of going to use this as a springboard into our conversation. You have such a deep tenure within the Title IX space. Title IX's been around for almost 50 years now. I'm really curious, as you've navigated over the last 30, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of Title IX? Where has it succeeded? Where has it failed? And what are some of the learnings as we look as, the NCAA is evolving that we can continue to iterate and improve on?
Well, I was actually thinking coming into this meeting with you, years ago, we didn't have opportunities like this to actually get information about Title IX out there. And I'm so grateful that these types of avenues exist, because the biggest problem I think about Title IX is that people are scared to death about it. They don't understand what it is. They don't know what it means. And for many years, when I would say I was a Title IX lawyer, people would turn around and run the other way. Education, information, real discussions about what it means to have equality in sports, but also all of the different aspects of Title IX that allow for protections of athletes in addition to equality. Many of the matters that I have dealt with have been situations where people have been accused of sexual assault, or people have been victims of sexual assault. And Title IX plays an important part there, because Title IX steps in and says, if you are involved in this incident, either as someone who has been a victim or somebody who's being accused, you have equal rights to make sure that you can still access your education, that you can still access your educational activities. And it puts a burden on institutions where athletes are, a key member of their communities to make sure that the processes and the procedures that take place protect the athlete's rights. And ultimately, that's why I'm here. My goal is make sure you're educated about what the subject matter is and make sure that you have what you need in place to be protected. Around the middle of my career, I did work in-house as an attorney at an institution, and I had the pleasure of being able to write the policy and procedure for Title IX at that institution. Really weighing the things that are important to athletes, to students as they continue to develop and grow. Listen, when you come into college, you're 18, 19 years old, and it's one of the things that I'm seeing right now is that these 18, 19-year-olds are jumping into situations where they're immediately becoming adults and having to deal with really adult issues of finances and the pressures that come with basically being treated as an employee and not just a student.
Yeah. And look, we're going to spend, a significant amount of time around the evolution of the NIL space and, sort of where you see blind spots, where there's opportunities to improve. But just want to piggyback sort of the Title IX, as we've watched the recent House NCAA settlement and other legal developments start to shape and dramatically alter what amateurism looks like. What are some of the unintended consequences that you're seeing these changes implement or institute, particularly for small schools and women's sports? The conversations are so dominated by the Power Fives, men's basketball, men's football. Curious sort of through your lens, what are those unintended consequences?
Well, we're already seeing that women's sports and Olympic sports are not being treated equally, nor are they even being considered equally. There is a significant argument out there that the NCAA settlement, as it's proposed, on its face, didn't consider where women's and men's sports started and what the foundation was, and whether or not women and men were really on equal footing before there was a consideration as to who's generated the most revenues or how or what the opportunities have been to the athletes to be able to generate. And so, the disproportionate allocation of these funds to men's sports, I think needs a closer examination, definitely going forward. I would argue that I wish there was a different evaluation going backward and a review of the settlement, simply because I don't think that women's sports and Olympic sports really got a fair shake. And so going forward, I think it's going to be an absolute necessity that that female sports have more of a say, have more of a position, that we allow for more resources, that they have access to the ability to even get an NIL offer, and that's just not happening right now.
No, it's. I mean, look at as a proud girl dad. My daughter's 3 years old, but we have so many conversations. The work that we're going to do now will ultimately reestablish the foundation for the world of, if she chooses to go into athletics, what that will look like, right? So the hard conversations that need to be had right now will ultimately shape what the future is going to look like. And I don't disagree with you that we sometimes get jaded by the capitalistic vision and not the holistic vision of what sport has to offer. Christine, let me ask you this, right? There's such we have all the traditional sports on the women's side. I'm curious, when we see a new sports like women's flag, sort of start and have this, heroic rise, there's not as much of a lineage and foundation. Do you find more opportunities to go ahead and press the boundaries and implement new strategies with emerging sports versus some of the sports that have a longer, deeper history? Or what has that been like with a sport like women's flag football?
To me, Scott, it all comes down to the feeling of whether or not the world considers female sports to be as exciting as male sports. And that foundational issue, something that additionally, if you're going to watch sports on TV, if you're going to go to, spend money to go see a sporting event, it's typically going to be a male sport. And, Title IX has, even though many more people are talking about it now, our founders and some real legends in our country have been working on this for 50 years, and so when I hear about something of a new sport for women, obviously I'm thrilled that there are more opportunities. But what I really think needs to happen is we need to continue the work that has been started by these legends in Title IX that have said, listen, we need to change the way of thinking. We need to equalize what we invest in these athletes, not just the opportunities outside that we provide to them, or expect things to be recreated. Invest at the same level that we do in male sports.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such good points. And, I think it sort of naturally drifts us in here, at Profluence on the, Sports Business Association side, we talk so much about education, access, and support. And when you're able to pull those three together, you can really start to build momentum around these, very necessary movements that are happening within sports. Christine, I'm curious, over your tenure and even more recently, many athletes and coaches, they don't fully understand their rights when it comes to NIL, contracts, terms, Title IX. What are some of the two or three common blind spots that you see from coaches and athletes that are opportunities for us to go ahead and help improve so they don't continually fall into them?
Well, I think that the assumption that any student athlete is going to know what to do when they are approached with some kind of offer with respect to an NIL is probably the first blind spot. And institutions have traditionally, and administrators at institutions have traditionally been afraid to involve legal minds with their athletes. They want to keep the legal minds out, but I really think we're in a genre now that we need to invite legal thought into what's happening, because we are navigating something that is completely been unseen before, and things need to be reestablished, reimagined, rewritten. And it is important that there's a balance of understanding of and protection for the student athletes, not just the institutions. And so the student athletes, as I mentioned before, they're going from being, really being children into dealing with very adult issues. The college has always been this place where you go to develop, to learn, to grow, to start to understand some of the issues you'll be faced with. And it's almost been kind of this, protection until you get out into the real world. They're going from high school and they're going right into the real world. And there are really intimidating, high pressure issues that influence their daily lives. There needs to be more significant financial literacy for student athletes. They need mental health support. We have to stop treating mental health as something that is a negative and look at it as an investment in our athletes. And, an advocacy from people who understand the laws, who understand how to write the policies and procedures, who have experience doing it. Getting that assistance is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't put us on opposite ends of the table. It helps us educate, as you said, and influence good things happening for the individual. And I truly believe that we have an amazing opportunity to do it. I'll tell you, I have been inspired by some of the people that I have heard from who have contacted me and said, this is how I want to have a voice in this. This is what I want to do. And I encourage people to speak up if you have an idea, if you have a thought. But I also, at the same time, encourage people to understand that, there needs to be listening as much as there does talking.
So well said. And, I think as we continue to professionalize the ecosystem and the athlete gets a seat at the table, whether it's, post-career and investing now, all the way downstream, to your earlier days and developing and starting to leverage your platform to build a business around yourself. Those resources across the board have to professionalize in order to make sure that the app stays protected, stays relevant, and ultimately puts them in the best position to succeed both on and off the field. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Christine, I want to go ahead and ask, right? We use the front end of the podcast podcast to really sort of understand the scope of the market. Now let's start to talk about, as you lean in with your practice, if you could wave the magic wand and implement one reform in collegiate athletics, whether it was legal, regulatory, structural, what would it be and why would you implement it?
I absolutely believe there needs to be a federal resource that is governing what is happening. I don't believe that the NCAA is going to continue to exist, at least at the very least, not as it does right now. We're already seeing that many of the rules that have existed, are becoming archaic, or they are negatively affecting athletes and making it harder for them to be successful at whatever their pursuit is. So it 100% needs to be reform in that regard. Simply because of my experience, I compare it to what has happened with Title IX in the Department of Education, and it is a process. There should be an initial Bible, so to speak, that we all look at as to the rules and regulations of how it's going to operate, and that will develop over time as issues start to arise. In Title IX, there are things called Dear Colleague letters that have come out that have offered clarity. There have been question and answer periods. And that's how we all got educated. That's how we figured out which policies and procedures worked, which ones didn't, how to adjust, how to modify, and to really move with the times and to identify who might be being ignored or cast aside, and making sure that we are scooping up everyone who deserves to have the benefits of oversight in order to be protected.
Mm. Very interesting. And, there's a lot of transformation happening within the collegiate world. And, for the better part of a century, that has just been the development pipeline within the American sporting ecosystem. As amateurism now, has drifted away, I'm curious, do you envision a future where the NCAA becomes less relevant or even dissolves and we see some of the emerging leagues become a different ecosystem where we're able to go ahead and have more equity, and sort of reestablish what the playing field looks like? Just curious your thoughts on that.
I think we have to call college athletes what they are now, and they are professionals.
Yeah.
Amateurism is in many, many, many ways does not exist anymore. And so I do believe the NCAA is going to become less relevant. I do believe that we are going to need oversight from, as I said, from a federal organization that treats athletes and calls them what they are. We can't pretend about that anymore.
Yeah, no, it is professionalizing at every level, as we mentioned. And, Christine, I think that, regardless if you're a parent, an athlete, a coach, administrator, you're going to find yourself in these tight spots. I'm curious, like from your legal lens, what proactive steps should they take now to put themselves in a position to protect themselves, but also give themselves the opportunity to advocate and use the platform that they're building to, help transcend and shape what this, future market will look like?
I think the number one thing we have to say out loud is that 18-year-old that all of a sudden comes into a lot of money is something different than somebody who's in their late 20s or who is managing their own budget. And so when you're dealing with money and you're dealing with youth and inexperience, there are lots of potholes that you can fall into. And some of those are external pressures that come, whether it's family members' opinions about what you should be doing with your money or how it should be managed, or what your identity should be as you promote your name, image, and likeness, versus being a target for people who are trying to take advantage of you. And also, at 18, 19, it's hard to know, what you want your brand to be, and making sure that you are partnering with organizations that want the best for you, and aren't going to take advantage of you. All of a sudden, you might be dealing with an agent who is wanting to negotiate your NIL agreements for you. And so if that is happening, is that agent aware of all of the restrictions that might end up harming you? If you negotiate an NIL deal and then you end up getting hurt, what happens with that money that has been promised to you? And are you getting the right legal advice to make sure that you haven't spent money that you have to give back if something like that happens? What happens if somebody sees you as a target in terms of, using your money for their own purposes, asking for you to support them because of the situation that you've created for yourself? So lots of things that I think people like me and practices like mine, we want the best for the student athletes, and to be able to look out for those things.
No, I think you hit so many key points there, Christine. And I think exposure is everything, right? Like you said, we're being thrust from high school seniors now into the real world, and the decisions that are being forced to be made will have real world implications. And, as simple as just understanding tax infrastructure and making sure that we're set up in a way where we can, be compliant. And I think that goes a layer deeper in who do we trust in this world, right? I love my parents, but they're not necessarily the most skilled to help me navigate, legal matters and or financial matters, at the scale and magnitude. So I think the earlier we can teach and expose, the more armed young men and women will be to make these decisions and mitigate risk along the way. Christine, as we start to turn the corner and wind it down, I'm always so impressed with folks like yourself that have, weathered the tenure of sports, and you've seen multiple iterations of this. Give us a little insight into yourself. How do you stay sharp, from mindsets, habits, internal practices to make sure that you're at the top of your game in a world that seemingly is changing so quickly? It's information overload. Any insights for the listeners on, where you're getting information and, making sure that you're as relevant as you can be in the space?
Well, the most important thing to me is associating with people who have the experience that I don't. I don't know it all. I know a lot, but I don't know it all. And I want to be partnering with the people who care about things that I care about, and also care about things that I'm not aware of, that I can learn from. And so I am constantly learning every day. I have been, working with various groups to make sure that the issues surrounding equity are addressed. I'm participating in writing amicus briefs with respect to the settlement as it unfolds. I am seeking guidance and opinions from people that might not think the same way that I do, but understanding different perspectives, and continuing to educate myself as to how I can best serve the athletes that approach me. I do have 3 children who have been involved in collegiate sports, and I've had the benefit of watching what they have gone through. And I think that maybe how I have stood apart is the level of empathy that I have shared with my clients. And I do think that sets me apart in a way that I can make a difference in their lives. I have formulated a lot of wonderful relationships with the athletes and their families, so that inevitably when somebody comes to me, they're usually in a crisis. But once we address the crisis, I really enjoy participating in their success as they move forward and helping promote that. And there's nothing I love more than sitting in the stands and cheering on somebody who is living out their dream on a field or on a court. So
Cool.
It's all about seeking out the information and education, and I hope I can set a standard for other people and my clients to do the same.
I heard this along the way, and we're fortunate to get to talk to so many great minds like yourself, Christine, that success leaves clues. And some of the most successful people, not just in our space, but that we get to chat with across the board, are insatiably curious and they're lifelong learners, right? And so I think it's very important, specifically around this topic, for all of the athletes, coaches, administrators to understand the path that was carved for us to get here in order to go ahead and formulate opinions on how we should shape what the future looks like. And I think that, you exemplify that not only in what you just articulated, but in the body of work that you put out. And so, from the Profluence lens, we're deeply grateful for you coming on the show, sharing perspective and all helping us get a little bit better and, more educated as we go through this journey. Christine, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, maybe interested in participating, learning more, or leveraging their platform, what's the best way to do so?
Best way to do so is through my website. I write a weekly newsletter called Motion to Disrupt, which I would love for people to subscribe and more people to be able to read what I'm saying and tell me whether they agree or disagree, and to engage in conversation about that. My information and contact, I do my best to get back to people within a 24-hour period of time. And this is my journey right now. This is what I have completely thrown myself into. So, and if I could say one last thing, Scott,
please.
In getting to know you, I can see you've already done this, but I encourage everyone to embrace this journey. Everyone's talking about how sports are a mess right now, but I really think we have so much amazing opportunity available to us, and embrace the opportunity, figure out where you belong in it, and let's go for it. Let's really make, people have always been drawn to sports because of how much it adds a positive influence in their lives. Makes them better students, makes them better people, makes them learn, educate, train, discipline, all of those things. And I think by throwing ourselves into what's happening right now, we can all benefit from that.
Absolutely. And, I'll leave it with this and piggyback, Christine, that in this big mess creates a lot of opportunity to iterate, to evolve. And there's no better time to get off the sideline and continue to learn and leverage and help shape, right? This is the opportunity. Everyone talks about it. Hey, if I had the opportunity to put my fingerprint on it, this is what it would look like. And there's no better time than right now to start to put your fingerprint on it. And that was the whole goal of Profluence, was to knock down those silos and barriers, to have real honest conversations that ultimately shape the landscape that I talked about my future children will play in. So, again, Christine, the work you're doing is incredible. We look forward to supporting you along the journey. And, I look forward to doing this in New England, either in the fall or we'll wait till after winter. But thank you again for everything. And we look forward to following your journey.
Same to you. Thanks so much, Scott. Bye.
All right.